In 1878, deep in the unforgiving Arizona desert, there stood a lodging house like no other. Clara, the owner, wasn't offering rooms, she was offering graves. Guests arrived, weary and desperate for shelter, but they never checked out alive. The hotel always had space, but not for long. The desert demanded its due, and Clara's hospitality came with a terrifying price. People came seeking refuge, but they found only a one-way ticket to their graves. What was Clara's secret, and why did no one ever leave? James had been walking for days, his lips cracked and his body aching under the relentless heat of the Arizona sun. The desert wasn't a place for the weak. It consumed anyone foolish enough to wander into its grasp, slowly draining their will to live, their strength, until nothing remained but the dust. He had already lost track of time, each step blending into the next, each breath harder to take. The road ahead was as barren as the one behind him. The thirst gnawed at his insides, and he was beginning to wonder if he would make it out alive. Then, like a mirage rising from the scorched earth, he saw a building in the distance. A small hotel, or at least it looked like one. James squinted his eyes, wondering if he was imagining it. No, it was real, and it was his only hope. The last stretch of his journey felt like an eternity, but at last, he reached the entrance. A sign above the door read Clara's Lodging House. It wasn't much, but it was enough. James stumbled forward, his legs barely able to hold him up. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the cool air hitting him like a wave of relief. The smell of fresh bread and something sweet filled his nostrils. Inside, the space was far more inviting than he had expected. The dusty, weathered exterior of the hotel seemed to mask a warmth within. Wooden tables were arranged neatly, and soft candlelight flickered from the far corners of the room. A single woman stood behind the front desk, her eyes soft and welcoming. She was tall, with a sharp yet serene face, and her auburn hair cascaded down her back in loose waves. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You must be tired. Come sit. I'll get you something to drink." James didn't have the strength to argue. He nodded weakly, taking a seat in one of the chairs near the fire. The warmth from the flames was comforting, a stark contrast to the harsh, dry heat outside. He felt his body start to relax as his muscles loosened. The woman, Clara, he assumed, disappeared into the back, returning shortly with a glass of something that smelled sweet and rich. "Drink this," Clara insisted, handing him the glass. "It'll help with the dehydration." James hesitated for a moment, but his body screamed for relief, and he drained the glass in a few gulps. It was sweeter than anything he had tasted in days, the sugary taste burning down his throat and spreading warmth throughout his body. It wasn't just the drink that was helping him. It was Clara's hospitality, in a place like this. The desert was supposed to be unforgiving, yet Clara had managed to create something almost comfortable. After a moment, he looked around the room. The guests were unusual. All of them sat at their tables, some whispering quietly, others staring into the flickering flames. No one spoke to each other, and no one seemed particularly lively. There was a hollowness to them. James wondered why, but he didn't want to ask. Clara's presence alone made the silence feel natural, as though it was expected. "Don't worry about them," Clara said, as if reading his thoughts. "They're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" James asked, feeling a strange knot form in his stomach. Clara smiled, but it was unsettling, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. For their chance to rest, to heal. Some people don't leave, not for a while at least. James blinked, confused. "You mean they don't leave?" Clara's gaze remained steady. "Not until they're ready." Something about the way she said it made James uneasy. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The drink had helped, but it had also clouded his judgment. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was missing something important. After a few moments of awkward silence, Clara stood up. "I'll show you to your room. You look like you could use a rest." James nodded, following her down a narrow hallway, the walls lined with dimly lit sconces. Each door they passed seemed to open into another world. The hotel was larger than he had imagined. Stretching deep into the bowels of the building, Clara opened the door to a small but comfortable room at the end of the hallway, and James could already feel his eyelids growing heavy. "Stay as long as you need," Clara said, her voice warm. "The desert is a cruel place, but here, you're safe." James didn't have the energy to argue. He stumbled into the room, falling onto the bed without a second thought. As his eyes closed, the faintest sense of peace washed over him. He hadn't felt this comfortable in days. Maybe, just maybe, he could escape the desert after all. Hours passed, and James awoke in the middle of the night. The room was quiet, and the hotel seemed eerily still. The flickering candle on the bedside table cast long, creeping shadows against the walls. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream, the heat, the endless desert, the strange woman. But no, the smell of fresh bread and the taste of the drink still lingered in his senses. His curiosity got the best of him. He rose from the bed and tiptoed down the hall, hoping to find something, anything that might explain the strange tension that hung in the air. As he passed each door, he noticed something odd. The guests. They didn't move. Not a sound came from inside their rooms. Were they asleep, or was something else happening? He crept closer to one of the rooms, peering through the crack in the door. He couldn't see much, but what he saw sent a shiver down his spine. A figure, thin and pale, sat in a chair by the window. It wasn't the soft, welcoming figure of Clara, but someone different. The person's eyes were wide open, staring into the distance, frozen in place as if they had never moved. James' heart raced as he stepped back, unable to tear his eyes away from the figure. Something was terribly wrong. He didn't know how long he stood there, but when he finally turned away, he felt a cold breeze brush against his skin. He looked up to see Clara standing at the end of the hallway, her face unreadable. She had been watching him. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice almost too calm. James didn't answer immediately. He had 1,000 questions, but no word seemed right. Instead, he nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze bearing down on him. She smiled again, but this time it wasn't reassuring. "Don't worry. The desert claims many lives, but here we offer them rest." The words echoed in his mind as he returned to his room, the image of the unmoving figure still fresh in his thoughts. Something wasn't right. The desert might have claimed many lives, but he wasn't ready to become one of them. But James had no idea that the desert had already begun to claim him, and no one ever left Clara's hotel without paying a price. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Clara's hospitality had been kind, even welcoming, but as he lay in his bed, trying to make sense of the strange feeling that kept creeping into his thoughts, a question gnawed at him. Where had all the other guests gone? He had asked Clara earlier about the others, but her response had been vague, as if she didn't want to acknowledge their absence. "They're just waiting," she had said, her smile too soft, too knowing. There was something unsettling about the way she said it, as if the guests weren't truly alive anymore. The idea hadn't made sense then, but now it was all he could think about. James tossed and turned in his bed, the silence of the hotel wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the old building, but inside, it was still, too still. Even the sound of the crackling fire in the next room was absent. It was a suffocating quiet, one that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Unable to sleep, James got up and pulled on his boots, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his limbs. He knew he shouldn't be wandering the halls this late, but something inside him told him that the truth was hidden in the silence. He crept down the hallway, the dim light from the candles casting long shadows across the walls. The smell of something faintly sweet lingered in the air, a strange perfume that wasn't quite pleasant, but oddly comforting. He reached the end of the hall and paused, listening. The hotel was silent. The rooms were dark. As he walked past the first door, he heard something, a soft, low murmur. At first, he thought it was a trick of his mind, but then the murmur grew louder, followed by a weak cough, then a quiet sob. James froze. There was someone behind the door, someone in distress. His heart pounded in his chest as he leaned in closer, straining to hear the whispers, but there was no response, no more sound, just the suffocating silence. The door felt cold to the touch, and when he gently pressed against it, it opened with a creak. Inside, the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the lamp on the nightstand still burning softly. But there was something off about it. It didn't feel like a room that had been lived in. It felt untouched, unoccupied, like a showpiece in an empty museum. James stepped inside cautiously, his footfalls muffled by the thick carpet. The air was thick with the scent of dust, and yet there was no evidence of time passing, no sign that anyone had stayed there. He checked the closets, the windows, even under the bed. Nothing. Suddenly the light flickered, casting a momentary shadow across the far wall. For the briefest moment, James saw something, a fleeting glimpse of a figure sitting in the corner of the room. He spun around, heart racing. There was nothing there, no figure, no movement, just the flickering light. His pulse quickened. Was it just his mind playing tricks on him? Or had he really seen something? He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't stay in the room any longer. He had to find answers. With his breath shallow, he pulled the door closed behind him, the sound of the latch echoing down the hallway. As he walked down the corridor, his thoughts raced. Who was in that room? Why was it empty? Just as he turned the corner, he saw a figure in the distance, Clara. She was standing near the stairwell, her back turned to him. She hadn't noticed him yet. James had to know more, and this was his chance to ask. He walked towards her quickly, but before he could call out, she turned, her eyes locking onto his. There was no warmth in her gaze now, only something colder, something predatory. "James," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Are you feeling better now?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know. Something's wrong here. Where did the other guests go?" Clara's smile faltered for just a second, and then it returned, colder than before. "They're not gone," she said softly. "They are just waiting, as we all do." The words hung in the air, and James felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Waiting for what? I don't understand," James said, his voice tightening. "They're in their rooms? You don't hear them? There's no noise. It's like they're not even here." Clara's gaze never left his. "They're always here, waiting." James shook his head, frustration building. "For what? What are they waiting for?" Clara took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "For their release. Some of us, we don't leave, not until it's time." James's breath caught in his throat. He tried to speak, but no words came. Clara's words were like a knot in his stomach, twisting, choking the air from his lungs. She turned, motioning for him to follow her. "Come, I'll show you." He hesitated for only a moment before following her down the hallway. The tension was thick, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat in his ears. Clara led him to a door at the far end of the hall, one that James hadn't noticed before. The door was different, newer, as though it had been built just recently. "This is where they wait," Clara said, her voice almost reverent. She reached for the door handle, and as it creaked open, James felt his stomach drop. Inside the room were more people, all sitting perfectly still. Their eyes were wide open, but they didn't move. They didn't blink. It was as though they had been frozen in time, caught in a moment that would never end. James couldn't look away. There were men, women, young and old, all of them trapped in the same eerie stillness. Each of them sat, staring into the abyss of nothingness as if they were waiting for some unseen signal to end their torment. "The desert claims them," Clara whispered, stepping into the room. "And they become part of it, part of the land's hunger. And when it's time, they'll be released." James felt a rush of panic flood his chest. Released? To where? To what? As Clara turned to leave, she gave him one last look, her smile stretching across her face. "This is what happens to those who stay too long. The desert will take its toll." The door slammed shut behind him, and James stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at the lifeless guests who surrounded him. He could feel their cold eyes on him, could hear the faint, low hum of their breath, waiting. For the first time since he arrived, James understood. He wasn't just a guest. He wasn't even a person anymore. He was a part of the desert's twisted harvest, a soul claimed by the land itself. But James had one last chance to escape if he could find the courage to face Clara and the land that had already claimed him. James couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled into his bones. What he had seen in the room, the lifeless guests, their hollow eyes, the unblinking stares, had broken something inside him. The air in Clara's hotel was thick with something suffocating, something ancient. He had come here looking for shelter, but now it felt like he had stumbled into a nightmare with no escape. But even with his heart racing and his mind spinning, there was one thing he had to know. Where did they go? The guests who were waiting, as Clara had called it. Were they just stuck in time? Were they alive? Or was something much worse happening behind the closed doors of this twisted place? Unable to sleep, James decided to investigate further. He had to know what he had gotten himself into. Something in his gut told him the answers lay beyond the hallway, beyond the strange, unwelcoming doors he had passed earlier. He stood up, feeling the cold air of the room press against his skin. The silence in the hotel was deafening, and he couldn't help but feel like the walls themselves were watching him. Every step he took was slow, deliberate, as though the house itself was holding its breath. He moved toward the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath him. As he passed the door to the room with the vacant guests, he stopped again, his hand resting on the handle. What had he truly seen in there? Were they just sick, or were they something else entirely? Clara had warned him, "Some of us don't leave." The phrase echoed in his mind. James had to know what she meant. He turned the corner and made his way to the back of the building, his mind swirling with dread. Clara's words felt like a warning now, something to keep him from looking too closely at the truth. But he had to see it for himself. Through a narrow door at the far end of the hallway, he found himself stepping into a new world, one that made his stomach turn. The space was small, almost hidden away. At first, all he saw was a shadowed yard, the faint outline of something in the distance. But then, his eyes adjusted to the dim light, and his heart dropped. A graveyard. The yard was filled with rows of weathered tombstones. The earth was freshly disturbed, as though the graves had been dug just days ago. The names on the stones were blurred by time, some barely legible, while others seemed unnaturally recent. It looked like a forgotten burial ground, left to decay in the shadow of the hotel. Jameis' breath caught in his throat. It didn't make sense. Why would there be a graveyard behind the hotel? Was this a place for Clara to bury the guests who left the hotel? His legs felt heavy as he took a step closer to the graves. He scanned the names on the tombstones. Some were familiar people who had stayed at the hotel, he realized. Some were guests who had disappeared days ago, others who had been there much longer. But one name in particular caught his eye: Sarah Matthews. James had seen that name in the guest book. She had checked in a week ago. She had been one of the first guests to arrive after James, and yet he had never seen her again. Clara had told him she was waiting, but the tombstone told a different story. Sarah was gone, dead. The earth felt cold under Jameis' feet as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The desert had already taken her. It had claimed her body, her soul. She was now part of the land. A noise broke his thoughts, a soft rustling in the distance. James whipped around, his heart racing, but saw nothing. Only the empty graves, the silent tombstones. He turned back to the gravestones and read the next name: Thomas Hale, another guest, one who had come just before Sarah. Jameis' stomach churned. The list went on. Each name was another piece of the puzzle he didn't want to solve, but was already too deep into. He couldn't stop himself. His hands trembling, James moved to the next row. The more he looked, the clearer it became. These were not just graves of former guests. They were graves of the living, those who had come to the hotel, stayed for a while, and then disappeared. They had all paid the same price: a burial in the desert, where their bodies would feed the land's insatiable hunger. His pulse thundered in his ears. The air felt thick with something heavy, something alive. It wasn't just the guests that were buried here, it was the truth too. Jameis' legs moved before his brain could fully process the horror. He stumbled backwards, retreating from the graveyard, but as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A figure, a woman, standing near the far end of the graveyard, staring at him. Her face was obscured by shadow, but the moment their eyes met, a wave of cold terror washed over him. She was no guest. She wasn't like the others. Her eyes were wide, hollow, as if the life had been drained from her long ago. Jameis' heart stopped as he realized who she was. Sarah. She was dead, but there she stood, unmoving, her eyes fixed on him with an unnatural intensity. "Sarah," James whispered, his voice trembling. The woman's mouth moved, but no words came. Her lips parted, and then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone, vanished into thin air, like smoke in the wind. James stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what he had just seen. Had she been real? Was it an illusion? The graveyard, the figures, the unnatural silence seat was all starting to blur together. He was too deep into this nightmare now. There was no escaping it. He turned and ran back toward the hotel, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, suffocating him as he stumbled through the dark hallways. Clara. He had to confront her. She was the only one who knew what was going on, but James knew that if he faced her, there would be no turning back. But Clara was already waiting for him, and she wasn't the only one. The air was thick with the weight of everything James had just witnessed. The graveyard, the unmoving guests, Sarah's ghostly figure. The truth was beginning to take shape, and it was darker than he ever could have imagined. The desert wasn't just a land of heat and dust. It was a ravenous beast devouring everything in its path, and Clara had made herself its willing servant. His feet carried him back to his room, but his mind raced with questions. How could Clara be so calm, so accepting of the horror that surrounded her? Why had she brought him here? Was he just another victim waiting for the inevitable? As he reached his door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure of whether to enter or confront Clara about what he had seen. But before he could decide, the door creaked open, and Clara's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she said, her voice cool but with an edge of something sharper beneath. James's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his mind still reeling from the sight of the graveyard, the cold eyes of the dead, and Sarah's haunting presence. Clara stepped into the room, her presence commanding. "I'm sure you have many questions, and he'll answer them, but not all at once." She closed the door behind her, and James backed away, his breath shallow, unsure of what to do. What's going on here? Why are they dead? Why is there a graveyard behind the hotel? And why are they still here? Clara's eyes softened, but only slightly. "The desert," she began, her voice slow, almost reverent, "is a force beyond understanding. It's ancient, older than anything we know. It needs to be fed, always hungry, always demanding, and the land takes what it's owed, life, death, it doesn't matter. But someone has to offer it, someone has to provide." James felt a chill run down his spine. You've been sacrificing people?" Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the window, staring out into the desert. "Not just people. Souls, James. It's the desert's hunger. It cannot be denied." James shook his head in disbelief. "This is madness. You can't keep doing this. They're alive." "No, James." Clara interrupted him, her tone hardening. "They're not. Not anymore. Not after they've given themselves to the desert. The pact I made with the land years ago keeps me here, keeps all of us here. Those who stay long enough become part of it. The desert takes them, and they give themselves willingly." She turned back to him, her eyes darkening with something dangerous. "And you're no different." James felt a sudden pang of panic. No different? He had only just arrived. His body trembled, and his mind screamed for him to run, but his legs were frozen. He couldn't move. He was already too deep in, already part of this twisted world where the desert's hunger never stopped. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he had seen when he first arrived. The smile was cold, filled with years of sorrow and darkness. "I'm saying that you've already been claimed, James. You just don't know it yet. The desert doesn't let you leave. It will take its toll just like it took theirs." James's mind raced. No, he hadn't signed up for this. He hadn't agreed to any of it. But Clara's words had already planted seeds of doubt. He wasn't just a guest here. He was part of something far darker, something that stretched beyond the hotel and into the very land itself. "But there is always a way," Clara continued, her voice low. "A way to avoid the desert's hunger, a way to keep it at bay. All you need is to stay a little longer, give the desert what it wants, and it will spare you." James stared at her in horror. "What are you talking about?" Clara moved closer, her expression now filled with a mix of pity and determination. "Stay long enough, and you become one of them. One of the ones who gets to serve the land. You'll be like Sarah, a part of the desert itself." The weight of her words crushed him. He wasn't just a victim in this place. He was already being transformed into something else, something inhuman. And Clara wasn't offering salvation. She was offering damnation. "But I didn't sign any pact," James gasped. "I didn't agree to this." Clara's smile widened, the edges of her mouth curling with something almost too cruel. "You don't have to sign anything. The desert claims you, whether you want it or not. You've already entered its grip. The pact was made the moment you set foot on this land. The desert is a master, and it doesn't care about your choice." James staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him. The air felt thick, as if he were suffocating under the weight of the truth. He wanted to run. He had to escape, but Clara's words had already made it clear there was no escaping the desert. "Is there any way out?" he asked desperately, his voice barely audible. Clara's face softened, almost wistful. "There is a way, but it comes with a price that you may not be willing to pay." James took a step forward, his hands shaking. "What is it? Tell me." Clara sighed. "You must offer something the desert desires, a soul, a life. Someone else has to take your place. Only then will the desert release its hold on you." James' heart sank. She wasn't asking him to walk away. She was asking him to make a sacrifice, to feed the desert in someone else's stead. "I won't do it," he said, shaking his head. I want. Clara's eyes darkened, her smile now gone. Then you'll be like the others, part of the land, a soul consumed never to leave, just like Sarah, just like all the others before. You. The weight of her words settled on James like a stone. He was trapped. There was no way out, not without becoming something else. The desert had already claimed him, whether he liked it or not. And then, in the silence that followed, the ground beneath him trembled. The desert was calling, its hunger never satisfied, and it was coming for him. But what James didn't know was that the desert had already chosen its next sacrifice, and it wasn't just him. The town of McCulloch had never seen anything like Reverend Elias West. Weeks passed, and with each day, his influence grew. He was more than just a preacher to the townsfolk. He had become the very fabric of their lives. People no longer questioned the disappearances, the strange baptisms, or the odd sense of unease that lingered in the air. Reverend West had an answer for everything soothing, comforting, and convincing. The church, once a place of quiet reflection, was now a hub of activity. His sermons were packed with people, eager to hear the words that had saved them. Every sermon seemed to carry a message of hope, of cleansing, of rebirth. They began to believe that this was the second coming, that they were witnessing a miracle. But as his power grew, so did the tension beneath the surface. Not everyone was taken in by his charm. A small but growing group of people began to feel something was wrong. They had seen the blood that stained the waters after each baptism. They had heard the whispers about the people who vanished after the preacher's ceremonies. But no one dared speak openly against him, not yet. One of the first to voice concerns was Sarah Jenkins, the wife of Samuel, the man who had been the first to be baptized. Since that day, Samuel had been different. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the stream with hope in his heart. Something had changed. His eyes were colder, distant. He hardly spoke anymore, and when he did, it was as though his voice came from somewhere far away, distant and detached. Sarah noticed that her husband had stopped caring about their farm, their children, or their future. She had seen the same pattern in others. People were changing after their baptisms. They seemed to lose something, a part of themselves that they could never get back. But when she tried to talk to others about it, they dismissed her concerns. "Don't be foolish, Sarah," they said. "The preacher is sent by God. You've seen the miracles. People are being healed. Their souls are being cleansed. He is the Savior we've been waiting for." But Sarah's gut told her otherwise. Something wasn't right. She confided in her neighbor, Peter Henson's widow, Mary, who had her own doubts. "The preacher doesn't heal people," Mary whispered one evening. "He takes them. He's not saving them." As her voice trailed off, but Sarah could hear the fear in her words. Mary's words, a cold chill run down her spine. Mary's words echoed in her mind. "He takes them." What did that mean? As the weeks wore on, the preacher's power continued to tighten. His influence over the town was absolute. He had no rivals. People flocked to him, seeking salvation. The church was now his kingdom, and he ruled it with a gentle hand, his words soft but unyielding. No one questioned him, not anymore. His every word was gospel. But not everyone was satisfied. As more people came to the preacher for baptism, the more Sarah saw the change in them. They weren't being healed, they were being controlled. There was a hollowness in their eyes, a blankness in their demeanor. And the blood that stained the water each time someone stepped into the stream, no one seemed to notice anymore. It had become a part of the ritual, accepted without question. One evening, Sarah decided to confront the preacher. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening to her husband, to all of them. She found Reverend West in his study, the soft glow of a candle casting shadows over his face. He looked up as she entered, his smile warm, as always. "Sarah," he said, his voice like velvet. "How can I help you today?" "I need answers," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "What's happening to Samuel? What's happening to everyone after their baptism?" Reverend West's smile remained, but there was something colder in his eyes now. "You've seen the change in them, haven't you?" He stood slowly, moving toward her with a quiet, deliberate grace. "But you must understand, Sarah, salvation comes at a price. Not everyone can truly be saved. Some people, like your husband, are destined for a higher purpose. He has been chosen just as you have." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean, chosen? What is this?" "Do not be afraid," he said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "You too will understand soon enough. You see, the Lord has given me a task to purify the souls of the damned, and the price for purification is blood. Sarah stepped back, her breath quickening. She had been right. All along, she had known that the preacher's salvation was something darker. "Blood?" she whispered. "What are you talking about?" The preacher's smile widened, and for the first time, she saw something truly cold in his gaze. "The blood is necessary, Sarah. It's not just about forgiveness, it's about power. And for power to be complete, sacrifices must be made. But don't worry, my dear, you will understand soon. The blood purifies. The blood saves. Without it, none of us would have the strength to overcome our weaknesses, to become as the Lord intended." The walls of the small study seemed to close in on her. She was trapped. She had stepped too far into the preacher's world, and now there was no turning back. "You must leave," Sarah said, her voice a mixture of fear and defiance. "You must leave this town. You're not who you say you are. You are not a man of God. You're something else, something terrible." Reverend West's smile faded, replaced by something far darker. "You don't understand, Sarah. This is bigger than you, bigger than the town. The cleansing has already begun, and now it will be finished." Before she could respond, he stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. "But you will see. Soon enough, you will all see. The blood is the key to salvation." Sarah turned and ran from the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen the truth, but now she was more afraid than ever. There was no escaping him, no escaping the preacher. The town had already fallen too deep into his web. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, her thoughts raced. The preacher had been right about one thing. She could feel the darkness growing. The preacher's hold on the town was like a vice, squeezing tighter and tighter with every passing day. As she lay awake, a scream pierced the night air, a cry for help that sent a chill through Sarah's veins. It was a scream she knew well. It was the scream of someone who had just realized what they had become. But when Sarah ran to the window, she saw nothing. The street was empty, the town was still, and yet she knew that whatever was happening, whatever the preacher was doing, was now beyond her control. Sarah couldn't stop the preacher, but someone else could. James's mind spun, trying to process everything Clara had just told him. He was no longer a guest at a hotel. He was a prisoner trapped in a twisted game of life and death, bound to the desert's unyielding hunger. The idea of becoming part of the land, a soul claimed by the unforgiving desert, gnawed at him. Clara's words rang in his ears. The desert will take its toll, just like it took theirs. You've already been claimed. There was no way out, not unless he made a choice he wasn't prepared to make. James's thoughts raced. What did Clara mean by a price? What kind of sacrifice did the desert demand? And was he really just like the others, doomed to fade into the land's thirst? The cold silence of the room swallowed him. Clara stood before him, waiting, her eyes filled with a mix of pity and something darker. But James wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't let himself be consumed by the desert. Not yet, not like the others. He turned on his heel, desperately looking for a way to escape. The windows, locked, the door, closed and impenetrable. The weight of Clara's words settled on him like a heavy shroud. He was stuck, caught between a promise made long ago and his own desperate need for freedom. "You can't run, James." Clara's voice broke through his panic, calm and measured. "The desert always gets what it wants. You don't get to decide when it takes you. It already has." The cold realization sank in, and for the first time since he arrived, James understood. He wasn't just trapped in the hotel. He was trapped by the land itself. The desert had claimed him the moment he stepped foot onto it, and no matter how hard he fought, it would never let him go. James took a deep breath, steadying himself. He couldn't let fear control him. Not now. He needed to think. He needed to act. "I won't be a part of this," James said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'll find a way out." Clara's eyes darkened, her lips curling into a slow, almost sad smile. "You're not the first to say that, but the desert always gets what it wants, and it doesn't care about your plans." Her words were like daggers to his chest. He wasn't the first to try to escape. That meant others had come here, just like him, with hopes of leaving, and they hadn't made it. But there was one thing Clara had said that haunted him. You must offer something the desert desires. A soul. A life. James's eyes narrowed. A life. He had to give someone up. That was the price of survival. He backed away from Clara, his mind spinning faster than ever. There had to be another way. He wouldn't sacrifice someone else to save himself. But Clara wasn't the only one he had to worry about. A sudden noise from the hallway froze him in his tracks. It was faint at first, a soft, muffled sound, like footsteps or whispers. Someone was out there. Someone was coming. His pulse quickened. He turned to Clara, his eyes wide with panic. "Who's there?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she merely smiled, that cold, knowing smile of hers. "It's too late for you, James. You've already been marked. Now the desert will claim its price, and you won't be the one paying it." James didn't have time to react. Before he could move, the door behind him slammed open with a force that made the room shake. He spun around, his heart racing. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a woman, pale and gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. It was Alice, the woman who had arrived at the hotel days after him. James' breath caught in his throat. She looked different. Gone was the naive hope in her eyes, replaced by an eerie, hollow emptiness. "Alice," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What happened to you?" Alice's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something far darker, as if she were trying to speak but couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on him, pleading and empty all at once. Slowly she stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Shess already gone," Clara said from behind him, her voice cold as ice. "But Shess still here, and so will you be, James. You'll never leave." James stepped back, horror flooding his veins. "What do you mean? Shess alive, isn't she?" Clara's expression softened, her voice almost sympathetic. "Alice, like you, is part of the desert now. You see, the land doesn't just take, it consumes. And once it's claimed someone, they stay. They become part of the hunger forever." James felt his legs go weak. His chest tightened with the unbearable weight of the truth. Alice wasn't alive. She was part of the desert now. Like the others. Like Sarah. But Alice was still standing there, her eyes wide, her hands reaching out toward him. She was begging for something. But for what did she even know? "Help me," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely a breath. "Help me." Jim's mind raced. There was only one way out. The desert demanded a soul, and if Alice was already part of the land, there was a small chance, that he could save himself. But it would come at a cost, and that cost would break him. "I can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I won't." Alice took another step forward, her hands trembling as they reached for him. The desperation in her eyes was palpable, but there was nothing James could do. The desert had already claimed her, and if he stayed, it would claim him too. "You don't have a choice," Clara said, her voice cold and final. "You'll stay, just like the others." In that moment, James realized something that chilled him to his core. He wasn't just facing the desert's hunger. He was facing his own humanity. The moment he stepped into this place, had given up everything. The desert had already consumed him, not just his body, but his soul. With one final glance at Alice, James turned away, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. He had no more fight left in him, but the desert was watching, and it was always hungry. As James made his choice, he didn't realize that the land had already begun to claim him in ways he couldn't yet understand, and the desert's hunger would never be sated. The hotel seemed to breathe around James, its walls pulsating with an unnatural energy. The desert outside pressed in like a living, suffocating force, and he could feel it in the air and the cracks beneath the floorboards, in the walls that whispered with a hunger that was not human. The desert had claimed its toll. Clara had told him he had been marked, and now it seemed there was no escape. Alice's hollow eyes still haunted him, her desperate whispers echoing in his mind. The land had already taken her, had consumed her, and in that moment James realized the bitter truth. He wasn't just a guest. He was part of the desert's cruel harvest. Whether he left or not, the desert had already woven him into its dark tapestry. As he wandered the hallways, his mind clouded with hopelessness, James noticed something else, a figure, a new face, a woman. She was standing by the front desk, staring at the walls as though lost. She wasn't like Alice. This woman had not yet been touched by the desert's hunger. "Are you all right?" James asked, his voice strained. The woman turned toward him, her eyes wide, almost frantic. I need to rest," she said softly. "I've been walking for days. The desert, it won't let me go." James' heart skipped. Her words were familiar, too familiar. "You've come from the desert, haven't you?" James whispered, taking a step closer. You need to leave. It's not safe here." The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but she seemed too tired to respond. "I thought I could outrun it." she said in a distant tone. I thought, maybe if I just kept walking. She trailed off as if the energy had been drained from her completely. But it found me. James felt a rush of cold terror. The desert had found her. It had already marked her. The woman was just another soul doomed to join the land's insatiable hunger. Before he could speak, Clara appeared behind them, her smile as cold as ever. "She's the last one, James," she said, her voice soft, almost pitying. "The last guest to arrive. The last soul the desert will claim." James's mind spun as he looked from Clara to the woman standing before him. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "She's not like the others. She hasn't—" Clara's smile widened. "Oh, but she has. The desert has a way of finding its own, even when they think they've escaped." She stepped closer to the woman, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And she'll be just like the rest of them, soon enough." The woman trembled under Clara's touch, her eyes brimming with terror. I don't want to stay. Please, I can't." But Clara wasn't listening anymore. She turned back to James, her eyes colder than the desert night. "You should have left when you had the chance, James. Now, you're a part of this. You always have been." Before James could respond, the woman gasped, her body seizing as if some invisible force was dragging her into the ground. The air grew heavier, suffocating. The desert had claimed her. James watched in horror as the woman's body seemed to melt into the floor, vanishing into the earth, her soul consumed by the land. The cycle was complete. She was gone. "No, no," James shouted, stepping forward. But Clara stopped him with a firm hand. "Don't fight it," she said. "The desert's hunger is never satisfied, and there's no escaping it. Not for you, and not for her." James felt his chest tighten, his vision blurring as the reality of the situation set in. The desert didn't just take, it consumed. And no matter how far he ran, no matter how hard he fought, he was already a part of it. As the last echoes of the woman's scream faded into the air, James turned to Clara, his body numb. "Is this what you've done to everyone? Trapped them here? Fed them to the desert?" Clara's eyes gleamed with a mixture of satisfaction and something darker. "This is the price of survival, James. The desert demands life, and I have been paying that price for years." James felt his knees buckle as the weight of her words crushed him. The desert was a force far beyond Clara's control, and now it had him. But as Clara's cold gaze bore into him, James realized there might still be one way to escape, and it would cost him everything. James couldn't breathe. The weight of what had just happened, the woman vanishing into the earth, claimed by the desert, consumed by the land's insatiable hunger, was suffocating him. The walls of the hotel seemed to close in, tightening like a vice around his chest. Every corner of the building felt like it was closing in on him, every step he took only leading him deeper into the nightmare. Clara watched him with cold eyes, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't move, didn't flinch, as if the horror unfolding before them was just another part of the cycle, another guest, another soul for the desert. "You see now," Clara said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This is how it ends for all of us. The desert claims us one by one, and we feed it until there's nothing left to give. You are always going to be part of this, James. Always." James' head spun as he backed away, his hand clutching the wall for support. The air in the room was thick with dread, as if the hotel itself were alive, watching him, waiting for him to make a decision. His heart pounded in his chest as Clara's words echoed in his ears. "No, no," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "I won't become one of them. I won't." Clara tilted her head, as if considering his defiance. "You think you have a choice, but the desert has already made that choice for you. You're already here. You're already marked." James felt something cold wrap around his soul. He couldn't escape. He had tried to run, to fight, but the desert's grip was tightening with every passing second. His legs felt weak, his breath shallow. He had been foolish to think he could outrun it. But Clara wasn't done. She was toying with him, pushing him, forcing him to confront the truth. "The desert doesn't care about your will, James," Clara continued, her voice sweet like poison. "It doesn't care if you fight, or scream, or beg. It will take you when it's ready. And when it does, it will claim everything you are, everything you've been." James felt a pang of panic, a deep, gnawing terror clawing at his insides. He was trapped. There was no way out. The desert had already claimed him, just like it had claimed the others before him. But Clara wasn't finished yet. She had something else in mind, something darker. "But there's always a way," Clara said, her voice shifting, becoming more sinister. "A way to escape the desert's hunger, a way to break free from the land's grip." James looked at her, his heart racing. "What do you mean? How?" Clara smiled, a slow, calculating smile. "The desert is not a mindless force. It has rules, it has a code. And in the desert, there is always a price. You can escape, James, you can leave this place, but only if you are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice." James's blood ran cold. What sacrifice?" Clara's gaze never wavered. "You must offer a life. Not just any life, but someone who is part of this place. Someone who has already been claimed by the land. Someone who has given their soul to the desert." The weight of her words hit James like a ton of bricks. His mind raced, his thoughts a blur. A life. He had already seen what the desert did to its victims. They weren't just dead. They were taken, consumed, bound to the land forever. And now Clara was offering him a way out, a way to escape. But at what cost? Why would I give up someone else? James whispered, his voice shaking. "Why would I sacrifice another soul?" Clara's smile faltered, her expression darkening. "Because that's the way it works. The desert demands balance. You can't escape without paying the price. The desert will take someone else, and in return, it will release you." James took a step back, his stomach churning. "No, I can't. I won't be responsible for someone else's death. I won't be a part of it." Clara's eyes narrowed, and her voice grew cold. "You think you have a choice, James? You think you can just walk away? The desert has already marked you. The moment you set foot on this land, you gave yourself to it. You're already part of it." James' mind spun as Clara's words pierced through him. He had no choice. He couldn't leave. He was trapped. But there had to be another way. There had to be something he could do. Suddenly, his gaze flickered to Alice, standing motionless in the corner, her hollow eyes still locked on him. Her presence was a constant reminder of what the desert had already taken. The land had consumed her, just as it had consumed the others before her. She was no longer human. She was part of the desert's insatiable hunger, a ghost of what she had once been. And then it hit him. The desert doesn't just take life. It takes souls. He didn't have to give up a person. He didn't have to sacrifice anyone. He could offer his own soul, his own life. He could break the cycle. He could end it. James' heart hammered in his chest as the idea took root. He could make the ultimate sacrifice. He could offer himself in exchange for the others. The desert might take him, but it would free them. It would break the land's hold over them. And maybe, just maybe, it would end the curse that had been laid on this place. Clara watched him, her gaze knowing, calculating. She knew what he was thinking. She had seen this before. "You've made your choice," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The desert will take you, but it will claim everything you are." James nodded, his breath steadying. "Then let it take me." He stepped forward, his body numb, but his heart strangely calm. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if the desert would claim his body, his soul, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let the desert take any more lives. As he stepped closer to Alice, she reached out, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with desperation. But this time, James didn't turn away. He reached for her, holding her hand tightly, offering himself to the desert, to the land that had claimed so many before him. And then, with a final breath, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came next. But the desert's hunger had one final twist in store for James, one that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the land and the price of survival. James stood motionless, the weight of his choice sinking in. He had given himself to the desert, hoping to end the cycle of death and suffering, but the air around him grew thick with dread. The hotel, the land, seemed alive, shifting like an animal ready to pounce. Clara, standing still and quiet, watched him with a knowing gaze. But the desert's hunger wasn't done. It never was. The ground trembled beneath their feet. At first, it was subtle, like a whisper of movement beneath the earth, but soon the rumbling grew louder, more violent. The walls shook, cracks forming along the ceiling. Dust filled the air, swirling in thick, suffocating clouds. James staggered back, his heart racing. Clara stepped away from him, her face blank. "It's begun," she murmured, almost to herself. James' panic intensified as the hotel seemed to collapse around him. The floors buckled, the walls split. The entire building groaned in agony, as if the land itself was reclaiming what was rightfully its own. The earth split open beneath their feet, a massive crack forming down the center of the hotel. The desert had come to collect. The ground gave way, and James felt himself fall, the world spinning. He tried to grab hold of something, anything, but the building crumbled beneath him. He glanced back at Clara, who stood motionless, her eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Clara!" he shouted, but she didn't respond. The hotel continued to sink, and the desert claimed it with an overwhelming roar, the earth swallowing everything in its path. James tumbled, the air thick with dust, until everything around him went black. James woke to eerie silence. The hotel was gone. The earth was still, the weight of the desert's wrath lingering in the air. He rose, unsure of where he was. It wasn't the hotel anymore. It wasn't even the desert. Around him stood the souls of the lost Sarah, Thomas, the woman from before, all trapped in the endless grip of the desert. Their eyes were empty, hollow, like they were waiting for something, waiting for the land to take them once more. And then, from the shadows, a voice whispered, cold and ancient, "You are mine now, James, forever." The realization hit him with a crushing force. His sacrifice hadn't freed him. The desert had claimed him, and now, like the others, he was part of it, bound forever to the land's insatiable hunger. But as James stood among the lost souls, he realized that the desert's hunger was far from over, and it was still waiting for its next victim. James stood among the lost souls, his heart sinking as the realization washed over him. He wasn't free. He wasn't even alive anymore. The desert had consumed him, claimed him just like it had done to everyone before him. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was part of the land, a soul trapped, bound forever to the desert's insatiable hunger. The other souls moved around him, silent, their hollow eyes fixed on the endless horizon. They were waiting. Waiting for what? Was there a release from this place? Or was it just an endless cycle of torment with no way out? "James," a voice whispered, soft as a breeze. It was Sarah, the first guest whose grave he had seen. She stood before him, her face pale, her eyes vacant. "You're one of us now." He shook his head. No, I can't be. There has to be a way out." Sarah's lips barely moved as she spoke. "There is no escape, James. The desert takes, it always takes, and when it's done, you become part of it. A part of the land. Forever." James' heart pounded as the weight of her words sank in. He was trapped, a prisoner of the land's endless thirst. The desert didn't just take lives. It consumed everything, body, mind, soul. It fed on them all, and there was no end. "But there must be something," James begged, his voice desperate. "I gave everything. I sacrificed myself. I thought I was saving you all." Sarah's eyes softened, pity replacing the emptiness. "You didn't understand, James. You didn't break the cycle. You became part of it. We all did." The wind howled around them, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The land was alive with an ancient hunger that had never been satisfied. As James stood there, a terrible thought crossed his mind. What if the desert had never intended to free them? What if it had been waiting for someone like him, someone willing to make the ultimate sacrifice? And then he saw it. In the distance, a single grave. It was different from the others. The earth around it was untouched, pristine. The gravestone was freshly carved, its surface gleaming in the fading light. "No," James whispered, his body trembling. "Not me, not again." But his feet moved before he could stop them, drawn toward the grave as if some invisible force was pulling him closer. He could hear the desert's whispers, a low, constant hum that seemed to call his name. As he reached the grave, the ground beneath him shook violently. The earth cracked, splitting open like a wound, and the air grew thick with heat. The desert's hunger was rising, and it was coming for him. He fell to his knees before the grave, the realization dawning upon him. This wasn't his escape, this wasn't his release. The desert had just claimed its final price, and he was its next sacrifice. And then, as the earth trembled around him, a voice, his own voice, whispered in his mind, "The desert never lets go." But as James faced the final moment of his torment, he realized something worse than death awaited him, something far darker than even the desert's hunger. James felt the ground shift beneath him as the earth cracked open, swallowing him whole. The desert was more than just land. It was a force of nature, a living, breathing entity that devoured everything in its path. And now it had claimed him. His body trembled as he sank deeper into the earth, the heat pressing in around him. He could feel the desert's insatiable hunger pulling him into its depths. His vision blurred, and for a moment, everything went dark. But then, as his consciousness faltered, he heard something, a voice, soft and distant, calling his name. "James." The voice wasn't Sarah's. It wasn't Alice's. It was something older, deeper. The desert itself seemed to speak to him, its ancient power reaching out from the darkness. "James, you cannot escape." He tried to speak, to scream, but no words came. His body was frozen, locked in place as the desert's grip tightened around him. The hunger was all-encompassing, a force that would never let go. He could feel his very soul being drawn into the land, consumed by the endless thirst. "You were always part of it," the voice continued, growing louder. "From the moment you set foot on this land, you were mine." James's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the truth settling in. He wasn't just a guest at the hotel. He wasn't just another soul caught in the desert cycle. He was part of it. The desert had marked him the moment he arrived, and now it was claiming what was owed. But then something unexpected happened. A surge of energy rushed through him, something powerful, something pure. It wasn't the desert's hunger. It wasn't the land's cold, all-consuming force. It was something else, something inside him, something that had been waiting for this moment. He fought back. With every ounce of strength he had left, James pushed against the desert's grip. He wasn't going to let it consume him. Not like this, not without a fight. The ground beneath him rumbled, the earth cracking open wider, but this time he wasn't sinking, he was rising. The desert roared in fury, but James didn't back down. He reached out with his mind, his soul, and in that instant, he realized what the desert had been hiding. It didn't just consume, it fed on despair, on hopelessness. The desert was a parasite, thriving on the fear and suffering of those who wandered into its depths. But it could be defeated. James's heart burned with determination. He could feel his own power growing, feeding off the same energy that the desert had used to claim him. He wasn't just a victim. He was part of the land's balance, a balance that could be broken. With one final, desperate surge, James broke free from the desert's hold. The earth shook violently as the land itself seemed to scream in agony. But James wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. James fell to the ground, breathless, but free. The desert's hunger had been quelled, if only for a moment. As he looked around, the air felt clearer, the land less oppressive. He knew, deep down, that the desert would always return. It would always hunger for more. But for now, he was free. And as the last echo of the land's fury faded, James stood tall, knowing that the desert had claimed its final price. He had broken its cycle. But he also knew the truth. The desert was never truly finished. It would always hunger for more.